in Manitoba this year, we escaped the worst of the wildfire season, although our air quality was smoky for many, many weeks over the summer, as you likely recall. Across the country, it was a historic year for wildfires. It has prompted the Federal Minister of Emergency Preparedness to spend some time examining lessons learned from what happened and a safer way forward. Minister Harjit Sajjan is in Winnipeg today for a meeting with his provincial counterparts to talk about this and also about our all too frequent Manitoba floods. In fact, it's a continuation of a meeting. You might have heard in our news yesterday that Ottawa has now has some money coming to Manitoba, transfers of $193 million in disaster assistance funds that are now going to be flowing into the province. Good morning, Minister Sajjan.
Good morning.
Can you tell us more about this $193 million that's coming our way, and specifically how you see it being used?
Oh, absolutely. And first of all, the use of the funding will be decided by the provincial government, of course, as part of the disaster financial assistance arrangement with the federal government. What we do is we cover about 90%, up to 90% of eligible expenses. So some of this funding, part of this funding is actually from the 22 spring floods. It's the advance payment, and then a number of other interim payments that have also been made. And it's a way to making sure that we look after Canadians at their time of need. And every province is very unique, Hans. Sadly, with the climate-induced disaster that we have been having, and Manitoba is, sadly, another example where flooding takes place quite frequently.
Obviously, emergency preparedness is what you're looking at and what the funding is intended for. But what are your thoughts on Peguis First Nation? I just want to ask because they obviously had the 2022 flood. Still a lot of families out even this morning as we're speaking. Hundreds of homes condemned. So the funding might be coming. But at what point do you think that Peguis is, not emergency preparedness, given how often it floods there?
First of all, when it comes to the Indigenous communities through Indigenous Services Canada, there's a separate funding stream that money flows very quickly in the same manner to First Nations communities to support them, and this is done across the country. But I think the main point of what I find the discussion that I'm trying to have here is one is, what are the lessons that we need to learn? What do we need to get better at? How can we, first of all, prevent? How do we look at mitigating? How do we adapt so that we can deal with these disasters and limit the impact on property, limit the impact on human life? And that's the key part of this. So rather than just getting continuously responding, we need to take climate change seriously and get into the adaptation piece. And that's what we're really focused on now. So as I've had a great discussion with the minister just yesterday, and what we talked about was how can we, what do we need to do on the prevention side and building resilience. But when something does happen, I wanted to see firsthand what the response is and what the federal government can do, and I want to take the advice from the Manitoba provincial emergency response experts as well. And then the recovery piece is equally important. But as we look at recovery, it's going to be a continuous cycle. What do we need to get ready for next year? And how every single year, what are we doing to prevent and get better at dealing with some of the climate-induced disasters?
I'll ask you about the wildfires in a moment, which were just unbelievable across this country this year. But just one last question here on flooding. A permanent flood protection solution at Peguis is something they've been asking for a long time. Is your government actively looking at that?
Yes, and I had a good discussion with the minister about this yesterday. I'll be talking. I know that's going through review, environmental review, and so I've already asked my team to get me an update on this, so we'll get an idea what is needed. And just wanted to say, I was actually here in 1997 during the floods here in Winnipeg, and I saw firsthand the horrible impact that the flooding can actually have, and a lot of work that Manitoba has done to prevent. And I know that more work needs to be done. And this project is something that has support, but it has to go through the appropriate process for this. So I look forward to having greater discussions on this and how we can also learn from Manitoba and apply it to other parts of Canada as well.
As I mentioned, Canada reported the worst wildfire season on record. Just so people understand, how bad things got here. 13.6 million hectares burned in Canada. That's as of late summer, mid-August. That crushed the 10-year average, which was 2.2 million hectares. How critical to you is it that we understand how to respond to wildfires?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, actually, by when we did the final, to date, the final tally is 18.5 million hectares, and it's when you had wildfires taking place in many provinces and territories all at once, right after the flooding season was ending. I can tell you it was a scary moment for Canadians to see how many wildfires were touching communities and their homes. And we were able to respond to all of them by coordinating our efforts. But one of the things we need to get better at now is how do we prevent the impact of these wildfires. We have lots to learn from this year's response. One of the key things what I'm talking to my counterparts all across the country is how do we look at putting greater support right down to the local level to making sure that they have the knowledge base, the responsibility, and how do you look at preventing, and making sure that everybody is trained up on the emergency management system or the incident command system, so that they know not only what to do when this emergency takes place, but then when resources arrive, how do you utilize them very quickly? And my personal goal, as I gave direction to the department, is I want to make sure that we're having good situational awareness taking place all across the country, so we can have resources ready to go and stacked.
Now,
and so they can be provided immediately, so there is no gap.
Now, if I may interject here, you need people, though. When you look at the grassroots, the National Association for Volunteer Firefighters, Fire Chiefs, and Search and Rescue members, I know has been lobbying your government on that front, saying they need to attract younger people into the roles of volunteer firefighters. And they're asking for you to increase the tax credit for volunteering as a firefighter from $3,000 to $10,000, in part to help attract people. Is that something you're considering?
So one is when it comes to having more people, that's absolutely right. We do need more people with the right training. So in addition to having more people coming in through the flow, training more firefighters, type 1 firefighters, in fact, we need to make sure that we have experienced leaders. And we have one is put additional funding to have train more 1,000 firefighters. We actually just started a program this summer to making sure that we train people all across the country on how to deal with interface fires and how to lead those type of events. And what we want to do is not only look at what type of incentives we can increase for folks, so this is being considered at the federal level, but we also wanted to go even another step. We know that when in the past, firefighters, were called upon a month or two, but now they're being bounced around the country because there is such a need. And it's taking a toll on their mental health. So that's another area that we're going to be looking at as well. Plus, we're going to be looking at how do we boost up resources at the local level, but now also looking at the federal level. Yes, the military will always be there as a last resort, but what we need to do is look at what other federal capacities can be brought to bear, so that we can actually ease the burden on provinces when things take place.
So is a national disaster response agency and the hiring of a national fire advisor to coordinate emergency teams across the country something you're committed to doing or something you're exploring at this stage?
Well, to be honest, we already have this right now. We have a very good system.
Do you think we have a system that works right now without that, without national coordination?
No, so actually, to the Government Operations Center, we actually do have the ability to coordinate quite well. One of the things I get a lot of advice from folks. I've been, and I say with the utmost respect to when the advice is given. What we need to do is making sure we have, looking at the actual disasters, have the right system in place. And so what we want to do, and this is one of the reasons I'm actually traveling across the country, is when you take those ideas and look at what can work. Plus, we need to make sure that we have a response that's unique to each province as well and the territories. But once we have a system, we're going to be stress testing it, exercising it well, so that we're going to make sure that we have not only the right resources, ability, have the right governance structure in place for decision making as well. So that's what we need. So we're going to be looking at all sorts of different ideas. So we do have a system in place right now that can respond quite quickly. But I'll be honest with you, it is not meeting the need because climate disasters are increasing
Of what we saw
in
last
severity,
year.
and also it's right. So it's going to continually increase. So what we're doing is making sure that we continually learn, but also build a system that's going to work. The last thing you want to do is build a system that is not actually tested. And I'm going to make sure that we are going to be having the right exercises. So when we look at wildfires, just imagine now if we had wildfires across the country, just finished flooding, and then we had another earthquake disaster. What we want to do is when we stress test, we actually need to stress
So you can respond to both.
our system.
Exactly. We'll leave it there, Minister. Thank you very much for your time today. I know you remain doing meetings here in Winnipeg for another day. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for having me.
That's Harjit Sajjan, the Federal Minister of Emergency Preparedness.